Yes, we'll be back from the break. It's 10 minutes past 9. It's still watching Sport Means Business here, or Daily Kickstarter. I'm Anjuba region with Marcy Katsime here as we are going to be driving you and definitely heading into the last hour of the show. And I hope you'll keep, getting informed every other time we articulate out these matters. Remember, this information is quite very key and important when it comes to decision making and implementation at the same time. It could be a company CEO out there and, trying to see ways out how you can participate into that. But still, on that note, I'd love to remind you that the markets on the Zebra platform are already on. And for you to be a part of them, it's quite simple. *92# is the code that will avail with options where you'll be in position to actually own bonds and securities for a fee of just 15,000. You get a shillings. The markets open at 8:15 a.m. They'll run up to 3:15. They opened at 8:15 and they will run up to 3:15 p.m. This is effective Monday up to Friday, apart from the weekends and the public holidays when those markets cannot be accessed. But of course, despite the fact you have the rest of the days to capitalize and make money, something which I believe it's quite key and instrumental when it comes to your financial growth and development as an individual. Zabel says, my money, my future, and All Access Africa tells you got to do something new for yourself. Remember, it is 2023. Now, our discussion this time around as we head into our business side, just to remind you way back, the independence time, the journey of Uganda's economic independence, political, social, and so many aspects, but of course all these having some element of economy, and looking from all way down from 1962, the 1970s when we actually had some sort of a boost, and 1980s till of course the current ruling government came into power, and there was some economic prosperity that was achieved within this country as compared to way back. But still, if we had to trace back before 1962, way back, talking about the 18th where 18th, it was the 19th century because 20th was 19. Yeah, the 19th century. Yeah, way back when we kind of we are highly subsistence because
typically subsistence.
Yeah, because our cultures are typically known for that.
Yes, typically because before that was before the colonial times.
At the time, the likes of Sir Gerald Porto came in here. I remember those days we had Kabaka Daudi Chua, the Baganda king, because of course the Baganda has a strong touch in this play of Uganda's history, because we see most of the colonialists actually were based in here, and the missionaries that came in all the way, and we were more of traditionalists because we were comfortable. We didn't really mind about. There was not much of cross-border, some sort of a trade. It was more of a trade. We could trade within ourselves. And it was more of subsistence for domestic consumption.
I think then it was all about privilege, who had more. It wasn't about who has the money. It was about
the money, who has the more
cattle, who had more food,
exactly,
who had a big family. We're still traditional. I must say, we're not exposed. Few people knew how to read. Did they even know how to read? Actually, I must say, we got exposed in the 19s, actually, for us to be exposed to know, wow, education is really important, and maybe, speaking of English, knowing the commercial part of business, the commercial part of agricultural producers. By then, I think we had, we had coffee, cotton, and tea among the cash crops that we had. If you go back to the SST of P5, that is when we knew coffee, tea, and cotton were among the cash crops. That was then. Yeah, very true. Yes, that was then when commercialization was partly on the cash crops. Yeah. Before we got into the commercializing of the other products. Yeah. So.
Absolutely very true and very right. Now, still way back in the times, we get to realize that Uganda survived without much of foreign intervention when it comes to what we call loans, donations, even at the time of independence. Because it is, we know that at the time we got independence, there are some economies that are out there that we were actually ahead of. And currently they have gone to some states compared to us. Now, getting into here, we see that peasant agriculture production had been the predominant economic activity since the pre-colonial times. But of course, despite an active trade in ivory and animals, hides linking Uganda with east coast, that is of Africa, along before the arrival, of course, to most of the Europeans. And most Ugandans were subsistence farmers, and after declaring Uganda a protectorate, that is in 1893, we see that the Britain pursued economic policies that drew Uganda into the world economy, primarily, that is to serve Britain's late 10th, that is century textile industry. Now, cotton cultivation increased in importance after 1904, and once it became clear the cotton plantations would be too difficult and expensive to maintain, and the official policy encouraged smallholder farmers to produce and market their cotton, that is through local cooperative associations.
By the way, if you recall, actually Uganda was it used to have cotton as the leading
cotton was
leading export, actually, because we had a lot of it, then before, it would predominant more than other cash crops, like the cotton and maybe tea. And then in the 19s, maybe late 90s, that is when people started looking at maybe more in coffee. If you're to relate now and then, cotton is on a low compared to these other coffee cash crops, maybe like coffee. Cotton has really, it's now down, it's silent. It's no longer something we talk about compared to the 90s, because that was when the colonists had come into and that exposed us to these cash crops, and cotton was what we did best.
Very true. And that is what we had as a powerhouse in that perspective. Now, we still see this report that by 1910, cotton had become Uganda's leading export. That is in the following decades. Now, the government encouraged the growth of sugar and tea plantations. But of course, following World War II, officials introduced coffee cultivation to bolster the declining export revenues, and coffee soon earned more than half, that is, of Uganda's export earnings. So you can see towards the 1910s, when we started to have a diversification in terms of the cash crops that we can actually put out in there, that was quite a it was a milestone in terms of economic diversification of the country, Uganda. Now, Uganda enjoyed a strong stable economy in the years approaching independence. Now, agriculture was the dominant activity, but the expanding manufacturing sector appeared capable for increasing its contribution to gross domestic product, most especially through the production of foodstuffs and textiles. Now, some valuable minerals, notably copper, were exploited, and they had also been discovered, and the water power reserves were substantial as a result of that. Now, of course, 1967, that is 5 years after independence, Uganda and the neighboring countries of Kenya, Tanzania, joined together to form the East African Community, hoping to create a common market and share the cost of transport and banking facilities. And Uganda registered impressive growth rates, and that is for the first 8 years after its independence. Now, you can't realize that this success of this independence, we can attribute it to the union between Tanzania and Kenya when that corporation was formed, and that is 5 years after independence. And that's why we see that 8 years after independence, that's where, because I know there is this aspect of neocolonialism, but I have a feeling that what led Uganda have experienced a degree of prosperity during that time was the fact of maybe probably the colonizers hadn't noticed about unity amongst Africans, because it is something that when you go to majority of the stakeholders, majority of the experts, they will tell you that actually they actually tell you that the Western people, the Western world, to some degree has hindered the unity of Africa. So after withdrawal from independence, and literally they thought that even though we unite, there is nothing much we can do. Because the early days of the East African Cooperation were healthy, and that's why Uganda experienced that, where they joined with, because by then there were 3 nations before Rwanda and these others came in. So later on, where neocolonialism started to take effect, probably once there was a realization of what potential Africa has when it's united, but not only just Africa, but once certain regions in Africa, the East, West, South, have a certain understanding that can actually be very key in terms of enhancing economic growth and development. Probably that prompted the rise of the colonialism in another perspective in form of neocolonialism, where we see that the British started to take full control of Uganda's politics, and in some sort of a way, and well, that at some point neglected our independence as a result, and most of these interactions were in relation to economy. This is what you can do, because we see that if we had a rising manufacturing sector, what happened to it? Uganda enjoyed a strong and stable economy in the 3 years approaching independence. According to this report, agriculture was the dominant activity, but the expanding manufacturing sector appeared capable, that is, of increasing its contribution to the gross domestic product. So what happened to that? Because now we're talking about just early years when the manufacturing sector actually was promising to be on its peak, to ensure that there is, GDP enhancement of the country Uganda. So that explains it all. We are still digging down from before independence to during the independence time, and now the times after the independence, because we've gone some good years ahead since 1962. So you can see how this whole genesis came in a way. But I believe also, you see, Britain colonized a number of nations, it was able to conquer a huge number of land space, not only in Africa, but also from the global perspective. And you get to realize that as a result of them pulling out from that perspective, definitely they had already left people who had already been indoctrinated by their own ways of doing things. And even in their absence, you realize that these people that had those doctrines at some degree contributed to economic sabotage. And now it has been clearly put out by what the World Bank has expressed. This is sabotage. This is economic sabotage, because if somebody was saying that this is, it's not quite fair, because if the purpose of this bank was established to give out loans, to the countries, then World Bank trying to interrupt into the cultures of our country is also considered violation of human rights. So it's the entity itself is violating the human rights in names of economic policies. But then we remember that actually at some point in time, Uganda during these days, most especially the first 5 years after independence, it experienced economic success, as a result of the East African integration, and there was there was nothing to do with, this foreign donation coming in during that time. We don't see a time where a certain country donated or America donated to Uganda during this first time. It was predominantly us. The only disadvantage probably was about the elite at that moment were quite few. But it's not about, but you see, the funny thing is that the more we got more elite, the funnier things at some point got to some extent. So what was in there? Was it about somebody going to school, having a degree, or it was about having common sense, knowing that actually if natives in a country are suffering, there is no way an economy can grow. It's hard for an economy to survive on foreign support. Sometimes it may not be consistent, because we know that the foreigners can actually repatriate the profits, and that the external donors can actually also change their minds at some point, and they can put hard conditions for you to get this aid. It's clear. It tells you that empower the domestic citizens, let them make money, let them produce. Once they produce, they'll be able to pay taxes, which taxes you're going to put back into the economy and growth. That is kind of a simple economic strategy that doesn't probably need somebody to go to study too much of economics to come and exploit it as much as that. It's quite as simple as that. Not using hard economic terms, this and that. So, what happened? We're still digging in down in here. We shall be, of course, heading towards the 1970s. We are still in the early years after independence. Well, at this point in time, let's take a break. And still maybe to remind you that the markets on the Zabo platform are already on, and to participate it's quite simple. Star 292 hash is the code that will avail with options where you'll be in position to actually buy government bond securities for a fee of just 15,000. You can actually install. The markets opened already at exactly 8:15 a.m. and they'll be running all the way to 3:15 p.m. That is East African time, effective Monday up to Friday, apart from the weekends and the public holidays when those markets cannot be accessed. But of course, despite that, you have the rest of the days to capitalize it. Something which I believe it's quite key and instrumental when it comes to your financial growth and development as an individual. Zabo made this a reality. You gotta be a part of this. It's the 21st century. Buying bonds and securities is the new normal for this time, for this period of time. That's why Zabo says, my money, my future. And Alterx East Africa tells you, well, you gotta do something new for yourself. Remember, it is 2023. Let's take a short break, and when we're done, we shall be, of course, summing this up regarding Uganda's economic times, the early days of the economy, as we try to compare what is happening of late. Stick around.